Let's go. We're trying, and we're connecting. Alrighty. So, feels like a Monday to me. How about you?
Oh, absolutely. Welcome to the BA zone, where everything can go wrong and will go wrong at the last minute.
It's part of our charm.
Well, this is teaches you adaptability as a business analyst.
That's true. That's true. You got to roll with those damn punches because they're just going to keep coming anyway.
Now we are at the 8 o'clock mark, so the pre-show fun is not even going to happen.
No, I know.
I was so looking forward to talking about the Miss America pageant this year.
Well, we could take 2 minutes if you want, because I still need to make sure everything's up.
Well, I was just curious. You know, the Miss America pageant's no longer going to be called a pageant. It's going to be called a competition because they are removing the swimsuit and evening gown portion of the show. Which means, you know, they're saying that
nobody will watch.
Nobody will watch. Well, they're saying that, you know, they can wear whatever they feel comfortable in. And I'm like, well, shoot, we could have been in that at some point. You know, wouldn't you just love to see somebody come out like in, you know, sweatpants and a big shirt and fuzzy socks? You know, you would be comfortable.
I would be very thrilled by that. But what's happening, it sounds like, is they're saying, well, okay, we're going to say that you can wear whatever you want, but if you want to win, you know, but we're not forcing you to do it.
Well, I don't know. I think that's, you know, it's just fun stuff. But anyway, back to our live show. We're going to be talking about process flows this evening. And Kathleen, you want to bring up the site where shows where we are and how you can get to us? And
yeah, I just need you to talk for another 30 seconds while I get there.
Okay. So while Kathleen's going to bring that up, feel free to share tonight's program with anyone you might think might be interested in this information or is looking for a change of career or just get them off the couch. We're here for the entertainment value. That's what keeps you coming back. But we actually are going to give you some pretty good information here as well tonight. So feel free to comment during the show or ask questions, and Kathleen will bring them up and we'll get them to you. Process diagrams, basically, you know, they help you visualize the steps in a process. And it's usually the first step that we take in creating documents or requirements, and especially if they're not written. And believe it or not, there's a lot of times where, and here is the slide that tells you.
I think that was almost exactly 30 seconds still.
Almost exactly 30 seconds. I was vamping just a little bit on the intro. But you can get to us on Twitter, on Instagram, Periscope, Facebook, and YouTube. And there's all the URLs and things. And you can also go to thebazone.com and catch some of our older shows as well, or YouTube, wherever.
Well, you can also catch the most current show, too, because I always put a version of it there so that it's easy for people to find if they can't remember all the other places we're at.
There you go.
I do try to help.
She does. She's very, very savvy with the technical.
Yes.
Okay.
Which you can tell by the way I'm fumfering here.
Yeah. So we've recently gotten a lot of feedback, you know, from the community that when it comes to process flows, you know, people may know how to diagram a flow, but sometimes they just don't know where to start. You know, you're thrown into a job and they're curious. It's like, okay, where do I begin with these process flows? How do I start it? So tonight we're just going to give you like an overview of where you can start with that and to go through a typical process plan. There's different approaches on how to document this, but this is sort of like a standard that we kind of use, and feel free to adapt it as you need to. So let's take an example, like you've been dropped into this project, right? And they say, okay, we need process flows. And there's all different levels of process flows. And where do you want to start? Well, you want to start with the highest level of process flows. So what does that mean? You want to start off by identifying the big chunks of information that's going to have a lot of little tasks in those processes. And they sort of flow from beginning to end. So to give you a little example, you know, if you're thrown into this project, let's say it's a hospital system, and they had an out-of-the-box system that they customized, and maybe they bought it over time, And because they bought it from someone else who built it, there may be no requirements that are readily available. And now they've decided they want to just rewrite the entire thing, and they want to take it back in-house. And it's happened before, especially with out-of-the-box products. So from your perspective as a business analyst, the first thing you'd want to do is familiarize yourself with the process of how a hospital operates, right? So we'll use the hospital as an example. So say there's a patient who goes into the hospital with chest pain. Some of the big processes that happen in a hospital is the first thing that happens when you go in there is they're going to register you. So there's a whole registration process where they're going to get demographic information like your name, your address, your date of birth, and your emergency contacts and insurance information. And once they get that insurance information, another big chunk of the process is they're going to verify that you have coverage, you have eligibility in that insurance. And that can be going on simultaneously as you're having other things done in the hospital, right? So it's not always a linear process. It can bounce around a little bit, but that would be another big step that occurs in the process of being admitted to a hospital. Then you're going to have medical folks who are going to do patient evals, do an evaluation of your symptoms. They may ask you, they may perform labs or tests or imaging or x-rays, and they'll take a medical history on you, and they'll ask what meds you are currently taking. So that's sort of the clinical eval piece that's going on. And then as a component of that, they might treat you. They'll give you your current meds that you're getting. If you're staying overnight, they'll give you new medications. They'll start IV fluids. You might get surgery. And then from there, if you start to get better, maybe you move from one part of the hospital to another. They call that like a step down. And then maybe there you get physical therapy or occupational therapy. So that's another chunk. And then you're discharged eventually, and it goes to billing and collections. And they might actually send you a patient survey after you're out of the hospital. And you might have an outpatient follow-up. So right there are like 10 big processes that happen when you're admitted to the hospital. And that's a typical flow, not counting all of the things that can go wrong or the mistakes that can happen. And that's sort of like a negative flow. But see, so right then and there, you have these big groups of processes. So that gives you a couple of things. It helps you. Well, before we get to that, how would you get that information, I should say? So you could get that information by looking at that current application that they have and walking through it, or by shadowing users, observing what they're doing, and you identify those big chunks there. In my case, the project that I'm working on right now, I'm going into the code. It happens to be SQL code. So what I'm doing is I'm looking for procedures where it says create a procedure. That would be a fairly large chunk of a big step within a process. Or you can also look for developer notes that are in there that says, okay, this piece is doing this. So it just depends on where you come in the process and what type of information you have as to how you identify those big processes. And then we're going to drill down into those little processes. But before we go any further on that piece, Kathleen, do you have anything to add to the large, identifying the big process flows?
I guess the first thing I want to do is just throw in and remind people that while yes, being able to read the code is handy and important, don't panic. That's not the only way you can do it. Sometimes that's all people hear is, oh my God, reading the code or working in the code. Even if you don't know how to read the code, don't be shy about, starting, go ahead and just look at it and get what you can out of it. And then, maybe ask a developer questions when they have time, on a coffee break or something. Because it's the kind of thing that the more you do it, the easier it gets and the more you're willing to do it and all that kind of good stuff. Because it's a great resource, and it's also a great way to verify what you're seeing and what you're documenting. Because sometimes you're going through and you're like, okay, well, it looks like when I do A, B, C, and then, F happens. But then you go in the code and you realize that, okay, well, I just haven't tripped across these other conditions, and there's like these 3 other things that maybe you wouldn't have found out about otherwise until way too late in the process. The other thing I want to throw in at this point is that you shouldn't feel like, you have to be an expert in any particular tool. The reality is you can start this process on a piece of paper, on a whiteboard, whatever works for you. While we do encourage tool use down the road because it does make it easier to make changes and additions and that type of thing, getting started, just work with whatever you got handy and don't be too hung up about it. And while I've already interrupted the flow here, I do want to remind you that we have a mailing list. And if you go ahead and sign up, you will get a freebie. I think right now it is the survey tips. But not only that, you also then get the inside line on the things that we're doing, new stuff, new information, because what we do is we tell the folks on our mailing list what's going on first. And this is particularly important right now because we were about to announce something, but we're going to make sure that we tell our people on the mailing list first. So if you want to find out what that is, and you want to be on the inside line, you want to know before everybody else, go ahead, sign up on the mailing list. It's BAZone.com/mailing list. You'll get your freebie as a thank you, and it's a double identifier because of the GDPR thing. So you'll fill out a form, you'll have to verify that you requested it, and then you'll be on the mailing list, and then you will also find out the new cool thing that's coming down the pike. So just think about it. We're good. We don't sell our list. We don't share it with anybody. This is strictly a way for us to keep you guys in the loop about what's going on here. Did I forget anything?
Nope, I think you're good.
Alrighty, back at it.
And Kathleen is absolutely right on the back end piece. I'm the last person. That's a last resort to go into the code for me. I mean, if you like it and you want to go into it, I had no choice. I had to do that. But a lot of times, most of the BAs get most of these steps from researching information that might be out there, any kind of documentation on business processes or interviews, or like I said, shadowing. So a lot of that information comes. Last resort for me is the code, but I had no choice. So yes, I'm learning SQL. See, even people like us can learn new tricks as we get older. So it's been a challenge, but it's been fun. Okay, so once you've identified these big, higher level processes, the next thing you want to do is you want to select one of those steps, and preferably, if you can, it's helpful to start at the beginning and work your way to the end, but life isn't always that like that. So just select a particular step, and you want to start to break that particular step down into individual tasks and flow, and who does what. Because usually there's more than one person or more than one role involved in a lot of these processes, and some of the tasks float back and forth in between different roles. And a nice way to display that, whether you're drawing on a board, as Kathleen said, or on a paper, or if you're using some type of Visio or diagramming type of tool, you may want to use what they call swim lanes. And swim lanes literally look like, if you were looking at an Olympic swimming pool, they have those floats that identify the different lanes, and it typically goes horizontally left to right. And the way we usually do it, if there's multiple roles involved, is each role has its own particular swim lane. And then when you have a task, and that task, say, is, if we go back to the hospital thing, in the registration, maybe you give that person the insurance information, and then the person who checks eligibility, which might be a different role, they're actually going to go in and go online and check the eligibility or call the insurance company. So you would have a line going up to their task, and it sort of bounces back and forth that way. And doing it in that swim lane style helps you identify a couple of things. It gives you an idea of the different roles that are involved, the various peoples, and who you may need to interview. So it's going to identify the people you need to talk to as far as a role goes, who makes decisions based on what type of information. And don't forget, when you're doing these swim lanes, that the actual system or the application can also have its own swim lane, because that may be doing some type of updating or changing of screens. So in my case right now, I wouldn't be using swim lanes because I'm working on an ingest engine, and it's just all system. It's all just code writing. So there may be uh, one type of screen that might interact where a user might have it. But so you use the swim lanes however you like. There's different uses for those swim lanes besides roll as well. Anywhere where you're going to be moving in and out of different tasks or procedures, it's pretty handy to have that. And you don't have to use swim lanes. You could obviously just document this is the flow and this is how it goes until you know who does it. And then you can sort of refine that if you need to. And that's the next level of breakdown, going to the individual task within a role. Kathleen, you have anything else to add with that?
Yeah, sometimes I find if I'm feeling stuck doing the flow, sometimes I'll break out these other tasks just like in an outline or on a piece of paper or whatever, because sometimes that helps me visualize better how it needs to go into the flow. So, while we're talking about flows here and everything, that doesn't mean that that's the only thing that, you can do it on. Whatever works best for your process, whatever works best for your situation, it's going to be different from each situation. So whatever's going to work for you. Sometimes it works better if you just kind of like, have it up on wherever you can. If you get multiple screens, maybe try it that way, because you may also need to be documenting this from the standpoint of different user roles. So you might want to, be able to compare, this type of user to this type of user. It might be helpful to see them side by side as you're documenting it. So you just need to try all these different things. This is a real, kind of by the seat of your pants thing, because whatever works, works, and if something isn't working, then shake it up and try something else, because it's really important to get these flows right, because the decisions that you make going forward, you're going to rely on these flows as part of your decision-making process. So you want to make sure you take the time to catch all the things you can. We're human. We're not going to catch everything. But if you can get 90%, you're going to be much better off than if you catch 20%. That's my favorite rant at this part.
Okay, so once you start outlining the individual tasks associated with a particular process, you're going to want to start adding a level of granularity and details. And as you go along through this, pretty much what you're sort of looking for is you're trying to identify each task within the process step that you're working on. You're looking for where any decisions may be made, or any type of logic that may happen that needs to be fleshed out a little bit more. You can look at actions that require input of certain data. Is there certain data that needs to be captured in order to achieve the next task in the step? So what sort of propels the process forward? What keeps it moving? What is required versus what is optional that people might be doing? Who performs each task? And as you're doing this, what I've done in the past too is sometimes you'll see a lot of redundancy, where there's things that are duplicating, and they may be duplicating, and one little thing might be different, and it may have to stay that way. Or maybe you can incorporate common things into a more streamlined way of doing it. You'll see, if you see repetitive tasks that are occurring during different phases, you might be able to move them off to a sub-process that you can just reference. So, for example, if you're trying to determine in multiple places in that hospital scenario whether that person was in the inpatient side of the hospital or the outpatient, which is usually less than 24 hours, and that repeatedly comes up all throughout the code, you can just reference it by a little process box that says go to, the inpatient outpatient determination, instead of constantly re-diagramming that all the way across. If they are actually doing that all the way across, then it could be a nice suggestion that you said, we're doing this in 5 places. How about if we just make it a little process of its own that we can just quickly go to and reference, instead of having the coders code that piece of logic over and over again. So those are the kinds of things you're looking for at the granular level. Those are the things I look for. Obviously, there's tons of things that you can look for, but You're trying to help them improve a process. And some of these things enable you to do that by just looking for those type of, common tasks, repetitive tasks, things that you might be able to combine with other processes that make sense maybe for this role to do it instead of this role doing it. Maybe this role can input it and this role can edit it. Things like that. That's what you're looking for. And you don't have to go crazy. I mean, this is over time. This is not going to happen on your first shot of this diagram. This is going to be sort of a repetitive, iterative process until you get a signed off, finalized, complete flow. You're always going to want to start with the current flow as is before you jump into what we think it should be, so that everybody is seeing things the same way. Kathleen, would you agree, or anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That's all the reality of it, and that's very often the type of thing that people forget is that you don't do a flow and be done with it. It's going to take over and over, and that's again why we say it's fine, to start with whatever media you're comfortable with or you have handy in the moment. And if you're okay sticking with that, as long as you're willing to go in and make the changes and the additions and maybe rebuild it from scratch as many times as you need to if you're doing it on paper or whiteboard. That's why I favor using some sort of tool at some point once it starts to get gelled a little bit, because it's so much easier to be able to grab sections of it and move them and rearrange things and search and replace and all those kind of good things just to speed up the process, because this will be an ongoing process. And every time you think you're done, somebody's going to go, "Oh, did we tell you about?" Or you'll be in a meeting, somebody will go mention something, you'll be like, "Hang on, nobody mentioned that." Is that live? Is that where we're going? So it does make your life a little bit easier at some point if you do switch over to a tool, in my humble opinion. Your mileage may vary, feel free. And again, since I've already interrupted her flow, I'm going to remind you that you can join our mailing list at thebazone.com/mailing list. And the reason for doing that is we notify you about the shows and the topics and what's coming up, but we also use that as sort of our insider track. So the folks who are on our mailing list find out about new stuff first. And I will mention that we have something new coming. So if you are at all interested and want to be first to know about it, in the know as it were, you can go ahead and join the mailing list. And that way you will get notified first before everybody else about the cool new thing that's coming. Eventually we'll tell everybody, but we like to give our faithful followers the inside line first. So that's thebazone.com/mailing list. You'll get the survey tips as our thank you. And you don't have to worry. We have firm belief in karma, and so we will not do anything to your email name or email or your name that you wouldn't want done. This is strictly so that we can communicate the information to you. I think that's about it.
Absolutely.
Anything else?
We don't do anything. We don't trust anybody, so we don't do anything.
We know how we feel when people ask for our information, so we assume you're coming from the same point of view.
And listen, feel free to drop us any questions or comments. If not during this show, you can always go to our webpage and drop content or questions. And if you're interested in learning anything from Business Analysis, you have problems with anything that you'd like us to discuss, we'll try to get them on air. We have a schedule that we do we set a month in advance, but we're always looking for things that you guys need, because that's what we're here for. Okay, so back to the process flows. I just want to go over some tips that might help you out with these process flows. So there's some things that you really need to do when you're creating the flow, whether it's on paper. Eventually you're going to put this out for people to see. And there's certain things, certain procedures or protocols, whatever you want to call, guidelines that you should follow just to make it easier on everybody. So from the actual logic standpoint, for each task or each process, make sure you have a beginning and an end. Just don't leave them hanging. This isn't the place where we love cliffhangers. You really need to follow something through. Follow through. Tennis, golf, process diagrams, follow through. If there are any decisions or questions in your diagram that has branching logic, so if you ask a question, you ever see those little triangles in the basic flow chart, make sure if your labels are a yes or a no, that you have both. You don't just have a yes and then the no is off here hanging somewhere. Same with true, false, whatever your labels may be. Make sure that it's balanced. You have both sides of the equation. When you're labeling your diagram, or you're labeling your tasks or labels, make sure you're using language that everyone will understand. Sometimes if developers become business analysts, or QA become business analysts, sometimes they're a little too heavy on the technology side. And most of the time, you're putting this in front of users who may have a certain level of technology, but most of the time, you know, they're talking at a business level. So make sure you do that. As you're going through, if you want to create little flags on the diagram, or outline notes, you know, there's a lot of additional information when you're doing a process flow that sort of comes to light. So what I typically do is, for notes to myself, or notes just to give the reader a little more information, I'll usually put a little dashed line around a box with text, maybe make it a different color, so that they know that that's additional information and not necessarily part of the flow. The same way with flagging yourself to ask questions. Sometimes we do that in red so that we can ask questions during the flow process. And then eventually those little red question boxes go away because they become part of the flow, or they don't. On every single page, once you get to the actual creation of a diagram, you know, through a use of a tool, or even on paper, it's really handy and it's really necessary to have a footer line. You want to have a label, a header at the top that says what the process is. You want to have something on the bottom that says, you know, the version, whether it's in a draft or a final, or, you know, a final approved, the date, the version, you know, 1.0, 1.1, 2.0, whatever, and some title information. And you can throw the author in as yourself, so people know who to go to, who created this particular diagram. And we often put the logo of the company too, as well. You may put copyright and permission stuff. That can all be very small at the bottom of every page, you know, like size 8 font or something, just so that it's there for reference. And as you're going through, if you're going from one page to another, you know, please use off-page connectors that say go to page this and from page this, and or on-page connectors. If things get too crazy where you can't move things around, use those little connectors. You know, go to A, go to B on the same page. And what else is there? As you're going along, sometimes when you're doing this process flow, you can also identify business rules, you know, things that have to be in the system. And you could put a little legend or something as well with your business rules. There's, you know, hundreds, probably thousands of ways to do this. So these are just some of the top hitting things that'll make a big difference when you're creating a process diagram. Kathleen, what do you think? Anything else that you can think of off the top of your head?
Off the top of my pointy little head? No, I thought you were going to forget legends and I was going to ride into the rescue there. But you remembered. Yeah. The other thing I do when I've got questions, especially if it's turning into a large flow, is I tend to put certain keywords on them. So that way, when maybe a conversation is naturally going in that direction, I can quickly find those questions that are on that topic. Or if I'm trying to bring up the topic, it helps me kind of group them together quickly. So that's a good way to do that. And if, by the way, you're using something like the MindJet's mind mapping tool, they've got a really nice way to do that. You can actually bring up, when you tag things with certain words or phrases, you can actually bring up a little list so that you can just focus on those during that part of the conversation. Because it could be that some of those questions are targeted to certain part of your audience, or your subject matter expert team, or it could be that, you know, they just kind of naturally group themselves together. Maybe it's about a login, or maybe it's about error handling, or maybe it's about the interaction between this particular tool and third-party tools or other tools, legacy tools inside the system. So it's just a handy way. If it's a small flow, you don't really need it, but when you start to get into a couple of pages and you're got to be jumping from page to page, I find it just helps me stay organized and focused while I'm in meetings to go through those questions easily.
Mm. And when we're talking tool, we're not talking, you know, the guy that sits next to you in the cube who's a tool. We're talking about actual application software stuff. Whee!
Oh, I think there's a story there, but we'll skip that for now.
I'll just skip that right for now because we're getting late. We're almost at the time. So,
okay.
Before I get into the why this is important, is there anything else you have to handle, Kathleen, or are we good?
Sure, we can throw that in again. Let's, my hair is in my face. I'm sorry, it's bothering me. You probably can't see it, but it makes me crazy. Granted, it's a very short journey from where I am to crazy tonight, but okay. I did want to just remind you that you can find us in all of the usual places. So if you ever have a question, a comment, if you have a topic you want us to cover, obviously, if you have a question you need a fast answer to, let us know. We'll just answer an email or DM or whatever. But if you have a question you'd like us to cover because you think other people might also benefit from it, or, it's not an emergency and you can wait until the next show, you can find us on Twitter, on Instagram, on Periscope, on YouTube, and on Facebook. And if none of those work for you, that's okay, because we've got a website too. So you can go to thebazone.com. There's a bunch of information there. There's links to the live show there, as well as archive. And there's also a contact form, so you can reach out and let us know if you have anything that you think that we can help out with. We will certainly make our best effort. And I'm going to make one more, let me find this, one more mention of the mailing list, because I'm really excited about what we're going to be mentioning soon. So I want to encourage everybody to join us on the mailing list, so that way you can be among the first to know. So it's thebazone.com/mailing list. You'll get our survey tips to say thank you, and then you will find out sooner than everybody else about the cool new thing that's coming. Yeah, I'm a little excited. I can't help it.
She is excited. And going back to that reference of the hospital example we're using, that chest pain patient, that just turned out to be anxiety, and that's what we're trying to reduce by providing you with this information.
That's our goal.
Reduce your anxiety. Don't wind up in the hospital with chest pain. But the other reason as to why...
only end up there as a job.
Only as a job. That's exactly right. Not with a tree falling on you, which happened earlier today. I was standing outside, literally, and I heard this cracking sound that was like primordial. And I watched this giant, I'm talking giant tree, just fall right down in the backyard. And, if there was a T-Rex that started roaring it, I wouldn't have been surprised, because that's what it looked like. It just looked like something out of Jurassic Park. But you don't want to wind up in the hospital with that. But on the other hand, why is this important on the process flow? So the main reason, to visualize process flows, why it's so important, is it gets everyone on the same page. Half the people don't know what an application is doing because they don't use half of it. But they do have, certain, they can give you certain information that might be of benefit, even though they don't work in that piece. So it gets everyone up on the same, page. And it's looking at that current state, what is going on, and it makes it much easier to create and document the future state of what you want. And that's actually the fun part, that future state. Some of the research, Kathy and I are kind of geeky, so we like to document and look at the as is as well. But you want to get to that point where you can all look at the big picture, how everything is working, and make those process improvements. And that's all we have on this subject. I don't know, Kathleen, do we have any questions tonight, or it's quiet out there? You guys are quiet out there tonight.
Yes, they're just absorbing all the quality information we're providing, which is fine. That's okay, no pressure. Some days you feel more chatty than others. We're cool. We understand that.
This is true. Nothing bad has happened. Last week we had phones ringing that shouldn't have been ringing. And systems going down, so there's nothing entertaining.
The dog barking, although I did think I heard Tink a little earlier. Was that Tink barking?
No, but that sounded like literally something falling outside the door, so I'm not sure.
Oh no. So you don't know that something hasn't happened.
Don't know. Hopefully, I will know when I open that door.
Maybe somebody just dropped $1 million outside your door. It could happen.
It could happen. Then I'd be falling on the other side of it if that didn't happen.
I would volunteer to come pick you up.
That's right. Right,
So I just want
folks,
to throw
like-
one more thing in about the flows. The other thing that you're going to find comes out of this very often is enlightenment from your other team members who maybe have not seen the process this way before, or didn't realize that something was happening that they didn't know about, or that there's a problem or redundancies and all that kind of stuff. So there is a lot of benefit to this. A lot of people get very frustrated during this process because it feels very tedious, and if you don't enjoy it, it is. I mean, we're weird. We think it's fun. But it is absolutely worth the effort. So definitely don't shy away from it. Step up, get it done. It's going to serve you so well throughout the rest of the process. It's going to be totally worth it. I promise. I don't make promises easily. I promise you that.
Right, it's absolutely true. And you will find processes that you didn't even know people were doing because they were trying to get around the system that wasn't giving them what they wanted. That's always a fun thing when you find those type of things, and you can incorporate it in the new design. That's like the best. But
right. You become everybody's favorite then.
Yeah, superhero. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us. We know your time is precious, like everyone's, and we're very happy that you guys tune in and stay with us. And we hope to keep it light and entertaining. And don't forget to join us next week, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And we'll have fun. We'll see you then.
We always do.
All
right, folks. Have a good one. Thanks so much.
Good night, everybody. Take care.